Hi, everyone. My name is Josh Cheema. I'm an assistant professor of medicine and cardiology at Northwestern. I specialize in taking care of patients that have advanced heart failure and transplant cardiology, as well as those with hypertrophic cardiomyopathy from a clinical perspective. From a research perspective, I have a particular interest in machine learning and AI and using those technologies to improve patient care. My talk today will be on innovation in HCM by leveraging artificial intelligence. I should say this is a two-part talk. I'll be splitting the talk with Dr. Lampert, who you'll hear on the second half. So let's jump into the talk here. Here's an outline of what we'll be talking about today. We'll start with just a brief history of AI before touching on the impact of AI in medicine today, which is, of course, why we're all here for this talk in the first place. We'll go through some of the basics, some of the nuts and bolts, AI and machine learning 101. We'll go through machine learning for disease detection, and then talk a little bit about the FDA Regulatory Framework and how the FDA thinks about this. I want to let you guys know that I am not a computer scientist, not an engineer. I really got interested in machine learning and AI in residency when I got exposed to it through a lecture. And so I went on my own to learn a lot about these technologies and to understand how they can make an impact on medicine, and then did formal training as well through an AI fellowship that Northwestern started. And I share this to say that anybody out there who doesn't necessarily have a background in machine learning or in AI or computer science can get into this field. And I think I'll speak the same language as a lot of clinicians that are in this audience, which is probably the majority of you. So we'll jump into things here. We'll start with just a brief history of AI. And so the idea of AI, really the term of AI, came in 1956 at the Dartmouth Summer Research Project. I would call this a big brainstorming session from some of the brightest minds at Dartmouth and surrounding schools, where they talked about how do you give intelligence to a machine? What does it mean for machine intelligence? And here was really the first time that someone came away with the conception of a neural network, a type of algorithm that is meant to be modeled off of what the brain was thought to have looked like in the 50s, which led to a lot of the advances in the field today, which we'll talk about. Lots of optimism in AI in the 1960s and 1970s. So there's a lot of optimism in a lot of things during that time. During that time period when we had our first AI systems that were knowledge-based. Really, these were hard programmed, a bunch of if-then statements from a clinical expert. If this happens to a patient, then this. And they had a lot of optimism, like I mentioned, but they were not all that successful. Pretty challenging to use, and the level of insights that we attained for them were not great enough for people to really believe in these being the future of medicine. This, along with a number of other failures in AI, led to the first AI winter in the 1980s, and a lot of that optimism really turned into skepticism. And that sort of changed in the 1990s and early 2000s with more computing power, better and more prevalent forms of data, and improvements from the actual algorithms themselves that led to a resurgence in AI and the thought that this can make a big difference in our world. Some of the high-level examples we'll go through. One of them is IBM's Deep Blue, an AI system that beat a chess grandmaster at the time, back in 1997. Early 2000s, mid 2000s showed a lot of rapid advancements in machine learning as the computer power kept getting bigger, algorithms kept getting better, until the emergence of deep learning in the 2010s. These are some of the recent triumphs in AI, and all these are from popular culture, things that you've probably heard about in the news or people are talking about. Another one from IBM, they beat the Jeopardy champion Ken Jennings in 2011. Rapid advances in computer vision made an impact in a number of different fields, and about 2012 was the first time these kind of came to mind. Transformers, a type of architecture in the deep learning space that we'll touch on more later in this talk, have made a lot of advances in natural language processing and now all types of fields. AlphaFold is a particular project that mapped out the structure and really the three-dimensional structure of proteins from the amino acid sequence, something that we have struggled to do in biology for a number of years. Things like text-to-image models, like DALL-E, these are based on diffusion models, which are new AI architectures. And then the explosion of language models, which everybody no doubtly has been impacted by already, including ChatGPT. But why does any of this matter to us? And so these are great advances. This is very exciting for AI as a whole. But why for medicine is this relevant? Well, we know there's a lot of medical errors in medicine. It's because the system is very complicated, and so are our patients. The error rate is 3.7 to 16.6 in the source that I looked at in hospital admissions. So a little more than 1 in 10 patients have a medical error that occurs. That translates to about 44,000 lives that are lost that can be attributed to medical errors per year. And this is only going to increase as our patients are getting older, patients are getting more complex. There's more and more literature out there that clinicians like you and I should know about and should read and understand. And there's more calls for having personalized medicine. Instead of making recommendations to the whole population, how do we make recommendations to the patient in front of us? And there's burnout. And I think a lot of these things will ring true to those of you in the field that take care of patients, but there's a lot of reason that we need new technologies and new advances to make progress. There's a few quotes I want to share here from recent papers in the field, really highlighting the optimism for AI. And I'll tell you, this paper actually is one that is highlighting some of the challenges in AI and why we may need to be very concerned about its use cases, and they still are very optimistic about it in general. AI holds the potential to revolutionize healthcare by improving diagnostics, helping develop new treatments, supporting providers, and extending healthcare beyond the health facility and to more people. This is a quote from a paper from the New England Journal of Medicine in 2019 from one of the leaders in our field. Machine learning is not just a new tool, such as a new drug or medical device. Rather, it is the fundamental technology required to meaningfully process data that exceed the capacity of the human brain to comprehend. Increasingly, this overwhelming store of information pertains to both vast clinical databases and even the data generated regarding a single patient. I think this really encapsulates the idea behind why these technologies can be useful. So let's go a little bit into the impact of AI in medicine right now. I want to highlight some of the high-level papers that caught my attention, have caught a lot of people's attention before jumping into what exactly is AI and how do we use it. One is from one of the young leaders in our field, Dr. David Oying, who's now at Cedars-Sinai. This is work that he published in 2020 in Nature, looking at ejection fraction and how to measure ejection fraction using AI. So ejection fraction, for anyone who's not familiar with the term or the idea, is how much blood the heart pumps out with every heartbeat. It's a fundamental measure we use in cardiology every day to characterize how our patients are doing. As fundamental as it is, there's a lot of variability in how one expert reads it compared to the next expert, which is less than ideal. And so this is a system that Dr. Oying and his team created using convolutional neural networks and deep learning that they showed actually was accurate, reproducible, and better than the performance of the clinical experts they tested this against, based on deep learning and AI. They also made their data publicly available, which is a huge feat and very welcomed in this field. Some of the output metrics they'll show here, the R-squared is pretty high for predicting ejection fraction compared to the gold standard that they use in that study. And the AUC is 0.97 for predicting heart failure. Another project here I want to highlight is predicting atrial fibrillation from ECGs that are sinus rhythm right now. So this is an AI project that took an ECG that looks at the rhythm of the heart in someone that had a normal heart rhythm and was then able to predict their chances of having atrial fibrillation, a heart rhythm that can lead to a stroke, a very concerning thing, especially since some of our patients, the first time they ever present is with that stroke. This graphic here shows the performance of that model using the AI algorithm and a few other markers. And you see in blue here is the performance of the AI, and it's better than without the AI. The last project I'll highlight here is predicting hyperkalemia from ECGs. We can get a sense from an ECG if someone has too much potassium in the body or too little potassium in the body. But this group from Mayo in 2019 actually came up with a number, predicted your potassium is 3.7 or 3.8 or whatever it is, with a high degree of accuracy. Their subsequent work then went on to use an ECG tracing from a smart device to also predict the potassium. So really increasing the amount of tech that we have and the abilities from our tech by using these tools. So this is a figure adapted here from a colleague of mine, Kip Johnson, is a resident here at Northwestern, is very accomplished in the field of AI, looking at the different ways that we can apply this to medicine today, whether it's to develop drugs, to predict disease, to extend patients or extend clinicians from patients, and to integrate multimodal forms of data. There's a variety of use cases that we can put together from an AI perspective. So now we'll dive a little bit into AI and machine learning 101 and go through exactly what are these technologies. And so AI, artificial intelligence, the way that I think about this is really it's a model or an algorithm that is used to simulate some aspect of human intelligence or intelligent behavior, whether it's learning, reasoning, or problem solving, something that this machine, this algorithm is going to do that simulates some of what we could do that we would call intelligent. Machine learning is one method for creating AI, and I would say it's the most popular, the most dominant method in the last 10 to 15 years, and has really led to a lot of the advances in our field. Machine learning is about creating predictive models that are not programmed one specific way. Really, they're meant to learn from the data, to identify patterns in the data, and to come up with their own conclusions, their own paths forward using the data itself. That's the learning aspect of it. And then deep learning. Neural networks are a type of machine learning algorithm, and deep learning is just really the idea of using a neural network that's of a certain size. It's important, though, because image recognition, image prediction, many of the new natural language processing techniques that we have are all related to deep learning. The last thing from a definition perspective that I want to highlight is really augmented intelligence. And this is a term endorsed by the AMA and one that I think is really important. And augmented intelligence is, I would say it's a conceptualization of how we're going to use AI and the best way to use AI. And that's to focus on AI's assistive role. Like how can it help clinicians? How does it make us better? How does it augment our own intelligence rather than trying to replace human intelligence? That's not the goal here. The goal is to make us better at what we do and for us to be able to do it easier. So let's jump a little bit into how to use machine learning for disease detection. So from a high level, what is machine learning? How does it actually happen? This is a figure from Dr. Deo, one of the leaders in machine learning and in AI in the field of medicine, published back in 2015 in Circulation. And you can imagine this as a spreadsheet. And patients, every individual row is a different patient, and every column is a different feature or variable, something like high blood pressure, high cholesterol, diabetes. One of these columns is the outcome, the variable that we're trying to predict. In this example, whether someone has had a heart attack or not had a heart attack. That's what MI stands for, myocardial infarction. And so again, that feature, that's the columns. That's really your independent variable, your predictor, what you're trying to use to make a prediction as to whether someone will have the outcome or not. In a few of the main types of machine learning, one is supervised learning, in which we have that predictor, we have that label, that outcome, whether someone had an MI or not, and we use that to get a sense of how good is our algorithm, how well can our algorithm take these features and make a prediction on whether someone had an MI or not. There's also unsupervised learning, in which there's no predictor. There's no outcome we're measuring. We just have a bunch of patients and a bunch of data, and we're trying to find patterns within it and really trying to find groups of patients that are similar to each other for various purposes. I will say that the common quote in the field or the feeling in the field is about 80% of the work of coming up with these projects or completing these projects is just getting the data, getting it organized, getting it clean, because with garbage in, garbage out. And so that's really the biggest challenge, is just putting this stuff together. And so how do we formulate this into an actual machine learning problem? I titled this slide, The Learning Problem, again, taken from Dr. Deo's work in 2015. The first thing, and it's where clinicians are very relevant, is to find what is the relevant clinical problem? What are we actually trying to solve? And then how do we get a data set that has features in it, those variables that can be used to make these patterns or detect these patterns, and then the labels. What's the actual disease process? Who has it? Who doesn't? What else are we trying to predict? We break the data into different sets, the training set where we use to train the model itself, the validation set where we can test the performance of the model and make some additional tweaks, and then that final test set, really the way we actually test the ability of our model to do what we hope it does and then what we report in the literature. So the next step is training a model using the training data. A model is really a mathematical function that maps these features to the outcome. So we'll create some kind of model, we'll measure how good it's doing using the training and validation data. We'll make tweaks to the structure of the model, adjust the parameters within it, and keep on doing so until we think the model's at the right place, something that we call convergence before we test it. And then we'll test it one time and one time only on our test set and report the results, and hopefully have a product that can be useful in clinical medicine. And so how can we use this in clinical practice? So this is an example of how we use this specifically in our hospital to find patients with advanced heart failure, those that need an LVAD or a transplant, work that we published on in 2022. So the first step is developing the model itself. So here we highlighted the areas that we pulled our data from and the different modeling techniques that we used. Each of these are machine learning models, and we used the prediction from all three of them to come up with an idea. And we implemented that model so that once the model is then trained, then we run the model on patients that hasn't been trained on before, new patients that are coming through our system, to make a prediction on whether we thought they did or didn't have advanced heart failure, and generated a report in our electronic health record. That report was then pushed to one of our nurse clinicians that would review that information, make sure that they agreed, ask us as needed, the heart failure clinicians, and then get these patients into clinic to get them taken care of. So really an end-to-end way to try to use machine learning in the flow of clinical practice. So hypertrophic cardiomyopathy, the point of this educational series, why would we need AI for this in the first place? Well, for HCM and some background information, is a genetic cardiomyopathy. Really, the hallmark here is asymmetric left ventricular hypertrophy without an underlying cause. This is someone that has a thickened heart, or part of a heart that's thickened, without high blood pressure or valve disease or something else that can explain why their heart is thickened. It's pretty prevalent worldwide, 1 in 200 to 1 in 500, which makes us think there's about 700,000 patients in the US that have this condition, but only about 100,000 report actually having it. These are facts and figures from the citations I put below and from the talk that Dr. Martinez gave in the first go around in this educational series. The presentation can overlap with common conditions like asthma, mitral valve disease, anxiety, making it challenging to make the diagnosis. And unfortunately, rarely, but not a 0% chance, the initial presentation can be sudden death. Obviously, a life-threatening condition and something that we want to avoid at all costs possible. We can make the diagnosis clearly by ECG or imaging if it's reviewed by an HCM expert, but not everybody has that expertise. And it's on us. It's on the busy clinicians to find this condition and figure out what's going on. All of these are reasons for why AI could be useful here. And so how could we use machine learning specifically for HCM? What would that look like? Well, some of the choices we have to make early on, this goes back to the learning problem slide I showed, is what are the features we have? What are the variables we can use to make this prediction? What are the labels? How do we know who has HCM or doesn't? And what model are we going to use? Once we figure out that, we can decide what kind of machine learning task we want this. A natural one would be a supervised learning task where we have a data set with patients that do or don't have HCM. And then we move forward and train a model and then use it in real life. Use it to make predictions on if a patient has HCM or doesn't on data that the model was not trained on, using this real in clinical practice. And then we integrate it and hopefully have a system set up in which we can use those predictions in a relevant way to actually provide better care to the patients, not just to have a model that works well in isolation, but one that works well in clinical practice. A brief segue into the FDA Regulatory Framework, as this is important for work in this field. The first algorithm that was approved by the FDA using machine learning and AI was in 2018. When used to diagnose, treat, or prevent disease, the FDA has decided to regulate machine learning and AI-based software like a medical device. So in the same way that they regulate medical devices. Medical devices have three main pathways to get approval, to get cleared by the FDA. The most rigorous is pre-market approval. These are for devices that are high risk and are taking care of patients that are critically ill. This is often done through controlled trials. Then there's the 510(k) pathway, in which there's a product that exists on the market that's already been approved that is similar enough to the product that you have that the FDA can clear it based on the two products being substantially equivalent. The last pathway is the de novo pre-market review, in which the product that you've created, there's nothing like it on the market. And so the FDA has to go through their own process, a de novo pathway, to clear it for use. Like, for example, the product that Viz.ai has created to detect patients that have HCM. So some takeaway points. I think AI has made a lot of progress in recent years because of greater computer power, better algorithms, more data, and more interest in the field as a whole. And its impact is only going to grow in medicine. You're going to see more and more of this and hopefully use it to help patients. And it can be useful in a variety of ways to detect disease, including conditions like HCM, which we're going to learn more about in the second part of this talk.
Hello, everyone. My name is Josh Lampert, and I'm a cardiac electrophysiologist, assistant professor of medicine, and medical director of machine learning for Mount Sinai Heart. I'm excited to speak today about how artificial intelligence can be applied to the treatment of patients with HCM and where we're heading in the coming years. Here are my disclosures. Today, we are going to start with addressing trust in AI tools in the context of model explainability and teachability, as if we don't understand or trust what goes into a clinical tool, you're unlikely to use it meaningfully in practice. Then we'll discuss how to optimize clinical workflows with AI tools and relate this to HCM. Then we'll close with discussing what to expect in the future for HCM and AI healthcare applications. So to start off, let's talk about model explainability. This is a figure showing the classification of AI models according to complexity and degree of explainability in current practice. You'll see traditional machine learning models on the bottom right that are less complex and therefore easier to explain to a degree than the more complex deep learning models you see circled in blue. We hope to arrive at the green circle in which we can better understand what features a model is using to guide predictions. Let's discuss an example on why model explainability is important. We will use a type of framework called gradient-weighted class activation mapping, or GradCam, which generates a heat map to identify the most important features contributing to a model making a prediction. Now, you may be thinking, why is this guy showing me pictures of birds? Well, the reality is that you think and you know that they are birds, but it's not that simple. For example, the beaks are different shapes and sizes, and the coloring varies. Nonetheless, obviously, these are all birds, and you can train a model to tell you that. However, when you ask the model to explain what features were most important to determine that these are indeed pictures of birds, you may see this. Here you'll see that a heat map is created with red being the most important feature of the photograph to determine model prediction. In this case, the algorithm is identifying that the combination of leaves and branches suggests that these photographs are of birds. As you can imagine, this can be a catastrophic error for the purposes of clinical reasoning, diagnosis, and treatment decisions. We need to know what we are treating as the therapies target different pathophysiological mechanisms. Here's an improved model in which the actual birds are appropriately highlighted as the most important feature. Okay, let's move on from birds and bring this discussion to ECGs. Here you see an example of an ECG of a patient that the HCM algorithm predicted had a low likelihood of having HCM. You'll notice no area of the ECG is highlighted. Here you see 4 examples of patients that had proven HCM. The algorithm flagged all of them as having a high likelihood of HCM with the probabilistic output of the model at the top of the ECG. Here, the GradCam is guided to highlighting the ECG waveform to the exclusion of the empty spaces of the image. You'll notice that the QRS complexes are highlighted in red, which again reflects the most important feature in each example. This technique to explain feature importance is for each individual ECG, so different areas of each ECG are highlighted. I want to draw your attention, however, to this ECG here with the left bundle branch block. What do we notice about the pattern of red being highlighted here? In this example, the latter aspect of the QRS complex is highlighted in red. If you think about it, this makes complete sense. In patients with a left bundle branch block, ventricular depolarization spreads from the AV node, the His bundle, to the right bundle branch, and then spreads transeptally to the left ventricle. Therefore, the late forces, or the latter part of the QRS complex in a left bundle branch block, reflects left ventricular depolarization. Since HCM is a disease that preferentially affects the left ventricle, it's not surprising that the algorithm found that left ventricular depolarization is an important feature to determine whether HCM is present. The other QRS complexes in the previous example appear fully red, as there is simultaneous activation of the right and left bundles in those examples, and because there is so much more myocardial mass in the left ventricle compared to the right, the majority of the net vector of depolarization is consumed by the left ventricle. So now we've established that we can identify, using explainability frameworks, salient features that impact model prediction. But can we learn from these features? The answer is, of course, yes. This is a great paper from the group at Mayo in which they developed a deep learning algorithm based on the 12-lead ECG to identify patients with moderate or severe aortic stenosis. They used an explainability framework to identify salient features that guided model prediction. In this case, you'll see blue lines over important areas of the ECG, and the more blue lines you see, the more important that region is to explain why the model output reported a high likelihood of AS. The blue lines appear to be accumulating around the U waves, particularly in the right precordial leads V1 to V3. We published this study in which we manually evaluated patients with severe aortic stenosis undergoing TAVR. We were indeed able to identify right precordial U waves in a majority of patients. But to take things further, we also evaluated patients after they underwent TAVR. Of those patients that had right precordial U waves before TAVR, after TAVR, 87% demonstrated diminution of the U wave after the valve was implanted, of which 3/4 of patients had complete resolution of the U wave. Given similar blood pressures and electrolytes pre and post TAVR, it is likely these findings could be due to changes in wall stress or autonomic inputs after improvement in afterload experienced by the left ventricle. So now we've demonstrated evidence that human clinicians can themselves learn from model outputs and identify important features of disease in the real world. Let's move on to the impact of AI in clinical workflows and the implications for HCM. Why target HCM for workflow optimization? Dr. Cheema covered this, but first, HCM could be a challenging diagnosis to make. He had mentioned the errors in medical decision-making in the healthcare system. We know that women are diagnosed less frequently and later than men, despite a relatively equal disease distribution. In a survey of HCM patients, the range of time to diagnosis from initial presentation was from less than a week to 26 years. Patients reported significant psychosocial factors of receiving late diagnoses and, on the contrary, living with symptoms in the absence of a definitive diagnosis. Some patients reported repeated misdiagnoses. Potential targets for incorporation of machine learning into workflows include the ability to improve coordinating appropriate referrals, guide diagnostic workup, improve clinician performance, identifying concomitant disease or HCM phenocopies, facilitate multidisciplinary planning and optimizing medical therapy, and referral to experienced centers for advanced interventions if necessary. To inform this process, we can look to the development of individualized care plans and clinical pathways, a concept highly emphasized actually in the nursing literature. This figure demonstrates the process through which we can obtain treatment data from the electronic health record, and through data processing, identifying patient subgroups, and clinical evaluation, generate mapped out clinical pathways that promote consistency in medical care. The goals of such workflow solutions include improving efficiency both at the patient level as well as for the workforce and healthcare system. An additional advantage of incorporating machine learning into workflows is the promise of expertise proliferation. If we take HCM as an example, not every medical center has experts in the field treating HCM patients. Therefore, having an AI tool to work alongside clinicians to assist with disease detection can augment the quality of clinical care and guide expert referral when needed. Here we have 3 distribution curves as an example. The left is a curve for a normal distribution of clinical performance. The top performers are on the right and the bottom performers are on the left, with the mean performance in the center. In the middle figure, we have a scenario in which perhaps some widespread educational tools have helped overall performance. And on the right is a scenario that we hope to achieve in which we not only vastly improve clinical performance, but we also reduce variance in treatment. This is not to say that we don't individualize care, but more so improve adherence to best practices. There are clear concerns, however, related to incorporating machine learning tools into clinical workflows. And as we do with all clinical practice, let's start with discussing patient concerns. Patient distrust may be an important factor in the successful implementation of AI tools in healthcare. In this paper, over 2,600 respondents were asked to choose between an AI provider or a human expert in a variety of scenarios, such as seeking treatment for sleep apnea or hematologic malignancies. The majority of patients, about 53%, chose a human provider. Factors that impacted whether respondents chose an AI provider included whether there was a description of the AI as having superior accuracy, or whether the AI clinic had trained counselors to listen to patient concerns, thereby providing a human social component. If the patient's primary provider suggested or counseled the respondent that AI was the established next choice, there was a higher likelihood the respondent would pick the AI provider. Here's another example. This is a cross-sectional survey of 452 participants regarding attitudes towards AI incorporation into medical decision-making. Important insights into their responses include the desire for the independent testing of AI tools before they are used on patients. Currently, we have the FDA approval process to serve this role that Dr. Cheema outlined. There was also a strong preference for human clinician judgment in that respondents would trust the AI less than a physician in making an assessment. This one is a double negative, but there was a reasonable concern among respondents regarding data security. And finally, there was a strong signal that patients would want physicians to override the recommendations of an AI tool if the physician comes to a different conclusion based on his or her experience and knowledge. Similarly, respondents wanted their physician to always have final control over diagnosis and therapy. As you can see here at the bottom of the survey, there was an overall positive outlook on the use of AI in medicine. An additional barrier to AI workflows is the variability and complexity of institutional workflows and differences in resource allocation between institutions. Here you can see an example of part of an existing HCM workflow. Looks like a headache. And here you can see how a workflow can be streamlined using a machine learning algorithm supported clinical application. Now we'll highlight concerns from clinical teams. In this study of frontline emergency department physicians and rapid response team nurses, the team expressed concerns regarding the use of an AI tool used to identify patients with sepsis. There were similar concerns as seen in the previous survey in terms of perception of machine learning and trust. The team raised pragmatic concerns regarding context-specific utility of the application and accuracy of the model. Implementing the workflow program was also highlighted as a source of concern, particularly with how the tool layout is formatted and designed. For example, does the provider just need to swipe on a tab on an iPhone, or is the app less user-friendly? Information flow and team communication was also identified. This would cover whether notifications received a timely response disrupt the fast-paced ED workflow, or the well-known penchant for such notifications to become intrusive and interrupt care. Additional concerns included perceived impediments to nursing workflow, the new role of a physician as an effector arm for a model output, and lack of understanding, particularly if operating within a black box model for which the output doesn't appear intuitive. And just to define what we mean by a black box model, it is a model for which the output is not explained. Data inputs are provided and the output prediction is delivered. However, no one really knows what occurs between the input and the output. Anything can be in the black box. Additional barriers to AI-guided workflow implementations include the unclear landscape of liability for decisions made based off AI models. The FDA has issued guidance documents, both for good machine learning practice and, of course, has an established approval process, which Dr. Cheema already covered. In order to better understand how models can be applied, better widespread understanding of how model performance is assessed and public disclosure of performance metrics will be needed. There are also additional concerns regarding applying these tools to underrepresented and vulnerable patient populations, such as the external validity of currently published studies, model bias, and the unclear cost and reimbursement schema for AI tools. Potential challenges to clinical paradigms can create discomfort for clinicians. This is a study from 17,000 AF patients from 32 hospitals. While there are many limitations to this study, I think it illustrates an interesting point. The authors reported the performance of integrated machine learning and data mining approaches to risk stratify patients with atrial fibrillation for thromboembolic events. They compared these models to the CHA2DS2-VASc score, the standard of care used to assess stroke risk in patients with AF. While I wouldn't necessarily change management based on this study, the notion that we will soon to potentially upend many of our methods of risk stratification to better individualize patient care can certainly be met with a sense of disquietude. Here's another paper demonstrating a similar finding. I'll admit that there are certainly other metrics to assess model performance beyond just the area under the receiver operating characteristic curve, but the concept is still the same, and that these models may outperform the current standard of care. And here you can see the models performing better than the CHA2DS2-VASc score. This is a paper that we recently published in which we developed a deep learning model based solely on the 12-lead ECG to predict which patients with premature ventricular contractions will go on to develop a cardiomyopathy. Particularly in asymptomatic patients who have these extra beats from the bottom chambers of the heart, the burden of PVCs is a prognostic marker that currently guides management in terms of who to give augmented medical therapy to or in whom catheter ablation should be considered. In this study, the model prediction was independent of PVC burden with a vastly higher hazard ratio. The explainability framework actually did not highlight the PVC as an important feature for model prediction. This raises the question whether we might be identifying vulnerable myocardium or a subclinical myopathy. Therefore, as subsequent models become available for use, we must be cautious, particularly in cases where model prediction may lead to an invasive intervention. The importance of assessing models leads us to the HCM pilot trial. This is a prospective trial with an app-based interface with 6 months enrollment and 3-month follow-up in patients 18 or older who had an ECG acquired. The way it works is a patient receives an ECG, which is analyzed by the HCM algorithm, the same algorithm that Dr. Cheema had mentioned that Viz recently received de novo approval for. If the ECG is flagged as suggested for HCM, a notification is sent to the investigator through an app interface. The investigator reviews the clinical scenario and decides whether to refer the patient for follow-up. Recommendations can be added for the next best study depending on the clinical context and the team taking care of the patient. The case is then followed through the diagnostic workup and any therapeutic interventions. Just for context, here is an example of the ECG viewer in the app. You can zoom in, inspect the ECG, and minimize the detail screen with the measurements. Here are other examples of the interface in which you can review the echo reports or even blow up the echo images themselves for a direct review. You can also see the available studies for each patient. This is a case that we had in the trial so far. A 45-year-old man with a history of hypertension presented with palpitations. He denied syncope and reported that he received Apple Watch notifications that he has atrial fibrillation. The physical exam was benign, and he had no arrhythmias at evaluation. The HCM algorithm flagged the ECG as suggested for HCM, and the team was notified, and an echo was obtained which demonstrated HCM with a septal thickness of 2.8 centimeters. The patient subsequently underwent a cardiac MRI with 13% scar burden and was found to have frequent non-sustained ventricular tachycardia on monitoring and was referred to EP for risk stratification. The patient also did have AF, so the Apple Watch wasn't wrong. Ultimately, it was interestingly revealed that the family history obtained from the patient, which included a stroke in his father at age 60, subsequently identified later that with more digging, the father actually also has HCM. This is a representative ECG for what you can receive. Now, as we start to wrap up, let's talk a bit about the future. Just be mindful, the next part of this talk will include a lot of guided speculation. This is an image from a generative AI text-to-image interface representing a physician consulting an AI interface. While we may not have glowing AI robots giving us face-to-face advice, we will nonetheless see the rise of the AI-augmented clinician, both for the treatment of HCM and other diseases. For HCM, we can expect to see models assist with risk stratification for sudden cardiac death, ventricular arrhythmias, stroke, and predicting disease progression. Here's a well-known figure summarizing the prognostic value of LV apical aneurysm in terms of risk of sudden death, ventricular arrhythmias, and thromboembolic events. We can certainly expect future models to include a plethora of data points, such as patient demographics, whether obstructive physiology is present, ECG, echo, and cardiac MRI imaging data, and more. These are the ACC-AHA and the ESC guidelines for ICD implantation in HCM patients. Improvements in risk stratification stand to greatly benefit patients in intermediate risk categories, though may also help to reclassify patients previously thought to be low or even high risk, though it will be much harder and require much more stringent study to reclassify previously high-risk patients given the extremely high cost of being wrong. Regarding disease progression, rudimentary models have actually already been developed to predict disease progression in HCM patients with concomitant explainability frameworks. These studies, however, do not allow for sufficient individualization of model prediction. Just as a brief aside, on the right, you can see a random forest model reporting SHAP values. This is another type of explainability framework in which different features can be ranked in order of relative importance to model prediction. To accomplish such patient-specific individualization, the methodology for model development will likely include multimodal neural networks and omics data integration. This is a timeline of the technology over the last 70 years. I won't go through this again since Dr. Cheema already did such a great job, but I want to highlight the next phase of omics incorporation into model development. The omics include genomics, which is the study of an organism's genome, metabolomics, which is the large-scale study of small molecular metabolites in an organism or tissue, transcriptomics, which is the study of the RNA transcripts produced by the genome, such as non-coding segments, and understanding splicing patterns, radiomics, in which features are extracted from medical images, and proteomics, which assesses protein biomarkers and protein-protein interactions, which can form cellular activities and functions of proteins. I'm not sure if you all remember the animated series Captain Planet, but think of this as an example of the sum being greater than its components. By combining omics data and EHR data into deep learning models, we can promote significantly improved screening, diagnosis, and identification of disease targets while addressing issues of class imbalance, scalability, and missing data. These all can then be incorporated into interfaces to facilitate clinical workflows and help us arrive at true precision medicine. We've discussed the role of the AI augmented clinician, but I'd also like to specifically highlight the role of biosensors and wearable devices. Algorithms are already published for use on wearable devices and single lead ECGs. The concept of the hospital at home and the spread of virtual clinics will likely rely on wearable technology and machine learning algorithms to detect disease, risk stratify patients, and ultimately assess dynamic changes over time. Additionally, machine learning tools will certainly help to improve efficiencies and relieve humans from mindless tasks. Large language models will help with note writing, clinical summarization, and history gathering, multidisciplinary team communication, research, and education. Instead of consulting a senior member of the team, or up to date, or doing an extensive literature review, you could potentially ask a specific patient-related question and get a nuanced answer on the next best steps. We aren't there yet, though, but we're getting close. We are already seeing a big emphasis on the ethical and fair utilization of AI tools and the inclusion of underrepresented and vulnerable patient populations in model training. Good machine learning practice is evolving, as is the regulatory landscape, which will need to be standardized. In summary, HCM presents a diagnostic challenge that can be remedied by leveraging machine learning tools to improve diagnostic capacity, streamline workflows, and guide referrals while improving expertise accessibility. Explainability frameworks are helpful to understand important features in model prediction, and these findings are teachable. We should be cautious and encourage monitoring, particularly in early applications, of models that may further introduce risk to the patient. AI promises to supplement, not supplant clinicians. But I will go so far as to say that the only clinicians that might be replaced will be those that do not incorporate responsibly developed and tested AI tools into practice. Thank you for your attention.